All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're taking a totally objective look at a topic that honestly dominates headlines and dinner table debates all the time: reservation in India. We're going to unpack the actual data and arguments surrounding affirmative action, stepping way back from the emotional rhetoric to look strictly at what the historical context and the numbers actually tell us. The goal here is to really understand the framework of these policies and to examine this complex interplay between meritocracy, social justice, and some of the really widespread myths we have about poverty alleviation.
So is reservation about ending poverty? It's a super common assumption, isn't it? When people debate reservation, they almost always default to looking at it through a strictly economic lens. But the analysis we're diving into today poses a pretty fundamental challenge to that idea. It actually asks us to look much deeper than just financial inequality. You see, if we only focus on bank accounts and income brackets, we're kind of fundamentally misunderstanding the entire premise of why these policies were created in the very first place.
To break this all down, our roadmap today covers the core purpose of reservation, economic versus social justice, deconstructing the merit myth, the representation reality check, and finally, diversity, efficiency, and innovation.
Okay, Part 1, the core purpose of reservation.
A lot of folks actually assume reservation started right at independence, but it dates back much farther than that, all the way to the 1921 Madras Presidency. And later, it was explicitly enshrined to the Indian Constitution under Articles 15.4 and 16.4. Historically, reservation has always been a mandate for institutional diversity. It was deliberately designed as a social correction for historical exclusion. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that the constitutional framers didn't view this as charity or alms for the poor, right? They viewed it as a fundamental right to representation for classes of people who had literally been locked out of the system for centuries.
Moving on to Part 2, economic versus social justice.
Like we mentioned, the popular economic lens views reservation as a poverty alleviation tool. But a deeper analysis pushes back really hard on this, advocating instead for a social justice perspective. This perspective argues that systemic caste deprivation requires fundamentally different tools than simply addressing financial poverty. Think about it. You can be economically stable but still face severe social exclusion and prejudice. Reservation is meant to fix the latter. It's about addressing historical injustice, not just balancing the checkbook.
To really prove why the purely economic argument falls short, the data reveals a staggering wealth disparity. According to the World Inequality Database 2022, the top 10% holds a massive 60% of India's wealth. Meanwhile, historically marginalized scheduled caste, or SC, and scheduled tribe, or ST communities hold a negligible share, literally less than 5%. The sources emphasize that this isn't just some random coincidence of a free market. It's the lingering, tangible result of systemic exclusion that has left historically marginalized groups with almost no share of national resources. It clearly shows how historical social exclusion directly leads to massive, multi-generational economic disparity.
All right, Part 3, deconstructing the merit myth.
We hear the word meritocracy thrown around all the time. It's usually perceived as this perfect, objective system that just rewards raw, innate ability and hard work. But a deeper dive reveals a completely different definition. The sources argue that what we usually call merit is largely just a reflection of inherited cultural and social capital. So the key point here is that what we often label as pure, unfiltered merit is actually heavily influenced by invisible, generational privileges that some individuals are just lucky enough to be born into, while others are entirely excluded from.
Let's actually break down what those invisible factors are. We're talking about things like access to elite schools, the massive advantage of an English medium education, the highly expensive ecosystem of coaching centers for examples like JEE or NEET, and even parental literacy levels. I mean, if your parents are highly educated, your starting line is miles ahead of someone whose parents were historically denied the basic right to read. According to the analysis, when we measure candidates without accounting for these specific systemic advantages, we aren't really measuring their innate intelligence or capability at all. We're often just measuring their privilege.
Which brings us to Part 4, the representation reality check.
Let's look at some actual numbers that might jar our standard assumptions. Starting with 40%. The NSSO 2019 data highlights that the dropout rate for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe students is a full 40% higher than that of upper castes. And this massive gap isn't just driven by a lack of money. It's driven by on-the-ground social realities, a sheer lack of institutional support, and generational factors like parental literacy. These kids are getting pushed out of the system before they even have a fair chance to compete.
Then we have 30%. This data point is super revealing.
In the private sector, where there is absolutely no reservation policy, upper caste candidates surprisingly have a 30% higher chance of being hired over equally qualified peers from marginalized backgrounds. Why is that? Well, research shows this often comes down to an invisible alignment of caste and social background between the recruiters and the candidates. It seriously challenges the idea that the private market is just this perfectly neutral, merit-based playing field.
Next up, 8%. Get this, despite 75 years of affirmative action policies, SC and ST individuals make up only 8% of IAS officers at the highest levels of bureaucracy. Now, if we were strictly looking at their population share, that number should be way closer to 25%. This data proves that the upper echelons of power remain largely inaccessible, showing just how incredibly difficult it is to dismantle historical disadvantages.
And finally, just the number 7. Out of 245 Supreme Court judges appointed since India's independence, only 7 have been Dalit. Think about that for a second. In the highest court of the land, the very institution that defines justice for the entire nation, the level of ongoing institutional exclusion is profound. This underscores exactly why representation, and not just poverty alleviation, is the core issue here.
Finally, Part 5, Diversity, Efficiency, and Innovation. Taking a step back to look at this in a global context is totally fascinating. On one hand, you have the United States, where there's been this recent, highly publicized pushback against diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI programs, led by prominent figures who argue these programs actually hinder efficiency. But contrast this with countries like Japan and South Korea. These are nations globally renowned for their highly efficient, innovative machinery, and yet they are actively adopting affirmative action and positive discrimination policies to drive their workforce forward.
So the analysis leaves us with this incredible insight. Diversity at a workplace improves productivity. If you fill an institution with the same kind of people, the scope for innovation decreases. Inclusive environments actually fuel innovation. By bringing in completely different perspectives and lived experiences, organizations just become better at problem solving. This directly dismantles the myth that diverse hiring somehow lowers the quality or efficiency of the workforce.
So, wrapping this all up, we are left with a really heavy but absolutely crucial question. When people fail to find jobs or face systemic hurdles, they're often encouraged to blame affirmative action, basically pointing fingers at marginalized groups who are just trying to secure basic representation. But who actually benefits when marginalized groups are blamed for systemic failures? It challenges us to re-examine who the narrative of pure merit truly serves, and to recognize that true social justice might require us to fundamentally redefine how we measure worth and capability in our society. Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive into the data. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.